Welcome back to You're All Doomed, the podcast that's been slicing and dicing its way through the Friday the 13th movies, 13 minutes at a time. This season, we'll be tackling Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday. I'm your host, Brian.
And I'm Greg, wearing ridiculously long hair extensions.
This chunk begins with a blue transition screen and ends with someone holding a scalpel over someone's heart.
It's important that we say this right off the bat. We're watching the unrated version of this movie. It's the first time in our series that we've gone with something non-theatrical. But it was a little bit hard to come by for a while. It was out of print, but now it's widely available in the pretty awesome Scream Factory Blu-ray box set. So it should be easy to track down if you don't already have a copy. Right away, there's one very important difference about this movie. The first thing we see is a logo for New Line Cinema. The previous movies have been released by Paramount Pictures, but this time it's a new studio. New Line was founded by Bob Shaye in 1967 solely as a film distributor. One of its early successes was a re-release of the 1930s propaganda film Reefer Madness, and that became kind of a cult hit for them. That gave him enough capital to put together and produce his first full-length feature production in 1977, but they really wound up on the map in 1984 when they released A Nightmare on Elm Street, the Wes Craven classic. So people refer to this studio as the house that Freddy built. They also had some pretty strong success with the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie and later on with the Lord of the Rings trilogy. They're now, they got absorbed by Warner Brothers, and so they're now just kind of a subsidiary label, but they're still around in some form, even though Bob Shaye is no longer running it. I remember learning that the series had changed hands, like kind of when the commercials for this movie started playing. And I don't know what you think, but I was kind of excited at the time. I'm like, Paramount kind of started getting a little lazy with the last couple of movies, and New Line, they have great horror movies, and they know how to handle horror films, and so I was pretty excited to see that they had taken this over.
Yeah, I remember being excited too. I mean, I wasn't super familiar with how studio involvement influenced movies back then, but I do remember thinking that the Paramount era had kind of run its course and was truly curious to see if something was going to be different with the New Line era. So yeah, there was definitely some high hopes going into this.
Yeah, I almost felt like I assumed they would take this property more seriously because of their success with A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I mean, in hindsight, that was weird because I'd kind of thought that the Freddy series had gone off the rails, even at the time. So I'm not sure why I thought they would, be more respectful of horror franchises or something. But I just thought it was an interesting change of pace that at the time seemed to kind of come out of nowhere, and I was excited by it. We also learned that it's now a Sean S. Cunningham production. He regained the rights when Paramount and Phil Scuderi and those guys kind of let them lapse. He wanted to take the reins again, and he was the one that brought it to New Line. So we get his credit right away with kind of a dance remix on the soundtrack of the famous Ki 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 Ma Ma Ma. It's kind of got a little bit English on it. But it's nice to hear that's front and center.
The opening shot that we get is of a car driving down a winding road. It's a 1988 Toyota Celica convertible. It's a Connecticut license plate. It's 1207 SUP. SUP. We can see that the driver is wearing a New York Mets hat, so they're making poor decisions from the very beginning.
I was going to ask you about that because at first I thought it was Yankees, but it's the wrong color scheme. So I knew you're enough of a baseball guy that I was going to bring that up. I do like that, almost like putting on a pair of old shoes. We get familiar sounding score. It's very reminiscent of the first few movies in the series, and it just kind of feels like, we're kind of back on familiar ground here. The car passes a road sign that indicates that Crystal Lake is 4 miles away, Fairfield is 33 miles away, and Westport is 43 miles away. It also has a listing for Anchor Lake, and so I looked that up, and there actually is an Anchor Lake in Winslow Township in Camden County, New Jersey. It's actually 2 lakes that are separated by a narrow isthmus. And then while I was researching that, I also discovered that there is a Voorhees Township in New Jersey, which I thought was kind of cool. Yeah.
The car eventually pulls up to a nice-looking log cabin located at the bottom of those famous Crystal Lake Mountains we've heard so much about. The driver opens the door to the cabin, and we now see that it's a woman.
Yeah, kind of a hottie.
This is Elizabeth Marcus. She's standing in the doorway of this pitch-black cabin forever before she decides to turn on the lights, and when she flips the switch, the light bulb burns out, so she heads to a small shed outside.
We got our first jump scare when the shed door violently slams shut for absolutely no reason. But clearly we're meant to, be right back where we feel comfortable in the Jason universe. I'm surprised a cat didn't jump out.
I have to admit, I actually fell for this this jump scare because it's actually pretty decent, because seconds after the door slams, I mean, it's not even like 2 seconds, she steps out of the shed and no one was there. So it's not like she even has a second to react. It's like it's boom, and then she immediately goes outside to check and there's no one there. So there's not even time for someone to get away. So you are left wondering if someone actually slammed the door and was able to get away really quickly, or if it was just the wind. But I kind of dug that.
Yeah, that's cool. Rather resourcefully, she does fix the light bulb all by herself like an independent woman, and then closes the front door to the cabin. It's framed in a way that made me think we were supposed to see something going on in the darkness behind her, but no. I get the sense that they're just kind of playing with us a little bit, giving us obvious setups for, being the ninth movie in the series, we're all conditioned to expect certain things based on how the camera acts and how they set up these little vignettes, and they're not paying them off. They're kind of toying with us a little bit, which is fine. It's cute. There's another one with the medicine cabinet in the bathroom that she opens and shuts and then washes her face or whatever. And when she lifts her head, you expect to see something behind her, but there's nothing there, and it's just kind of it keeps us on edge. But so far there hasn't been a good justification.
Yeah, I definitely felt like the medicine cabinet mirror gag was intentional, because they do it like 3 or 4 times, and you're like, okay, one of these times you're going to see someone standing behind her, but they never do. So I'll give them credit, because that was kind of funny. It's like they kept doing it and like opening the cabinet and closing it, and there was no one ever showed up, which was great.
After her exhausting light bulb repair session, it's time to wash up. So she disrobes and gets in the shower. And the first thing that really jumped out at me as bizarre in this movie is that she has an insane amount of hair under the ball cap that she's wearing. I don't believe that that's physically possible to pack that much hair under that cap.
Yeah, and even when she takes the hat off, there's this clear separation between what is probably her real hair and the extensions, and you can argue that it's just the crease made from wearing the baseball cap, but it's clearly 2 different types of hair, but it's tons of hair.
Yeah, and it looks kind of like Klingon hair, so I suspect that it's extensions that they had the actress wearing. She's now completely naked, and she's about to step into the shower when the lights in the cabin go out completely. So she puts on a towel and then kind of creeps around on the upper level and peers down from the landing into the first floor darkness. But she still isn't seeing anything obviously wrong.
It's not what's downstairs she should be worried about, because Jason Voorhees is standing right behind her upstairs. He takes a mighty swing at Elizabeth with his machete, but misses.
Yeah, what was that about? I mean, why would he ever miss? It was point blank range.
That's a good point. Yeah, she was right there, and he didn't even really need to wait for her to turn around and react. He could have just done it before she saw him. So yeah, that's kind of a disappointing start for Jason here.
It's like he's a little bit rusty after having become an adult again after, the toxic waste turned him into a little boy in the sewer.
Or maybe he's also a New York Mets fan and he's used to swinging and missing.
Oh,
that's right, New York Mets fans. Shots fired.
We just lost 4 fans.
It also concludes the longest conversation you and I have ever had about sports. And we captured it on mic.
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, so Jason takes a swing at Elizabeth and misses, and as she's ducking out of the way, she stumbles and falls over the second floor railing and crashes down onto the table below in a pretty cool stunt.
Yeah. Less happily, Jason then scoots up to the railing and looks down at her. He's moving very nimbly. His motions are very rapid, but he looks like shit.
Yeah, he does. When we last saw Jason, he was being consumed by a river of toxic waste and turned into a little boy wearing gray sweatshorts. So yes, he looks quite different from the last time we saw him. You mentioned that he looks like shit, but he's also absolutely massive. Just like, I don't think we've ever seen a Jason this big before.
Yeah, he's bulky. Not pudgy, but just bulky. He's got this kind of pulpy look to his head with straggly tufts of hair, and the mask has sort of grown into his face, or at least the skin around the edges has kind of locked the faceplate of the mask where it is, and it's almost like he wouldn't be able to take it off anymore. So it's an interesting look. It's cool, but it looks like he's mutating or something. It's very strange. He's no longer just a deformed human being.
That's a good point. He's more monstrous in this than actually just a person that's wearing a hockey mask going around killing people.
Yeah.
This is definitely the most kind of like creature-like Jason that we've seen yet.
Yeah. And obviously his appearance scares her enough that she bolts outside, kind of doing a Dukes of Hazzard leap over the hood of her car, which was pretty great, and then takes off into the woods. And, bear in mind, again, she's wearing nothing but a towel. Although you can see that the actress is wearing little flesh-colored slippers, which made me laugh. Jason is in hot pursuit, and he's very grunty as he trucks through the woods, and he's moving with kind of a herky-jerky style to his movements that I'm not sure we've really seen a whole lot before. It's Kane Hodder again, so he's obviously very familiar with how to be Jason, but there's just a weird rapidity to his body language that threw me off a little bit at first.
The grunting noises are what bugged me the most, because it seemed like every time he turned in a different direction to try to figure out, where Elizabeth had gone, he was like, huh? What? And it's like, Jason doesn't make noises, and the fact that he's doing it now is just really distracting. Like, if he wants to make like a grunt or something when he gets, kicked in the balls or something, like, okay, fine. But for him to just be making these kind of like quizzical, sound effects as he's looking, it really bugged me.
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, that's probably not Kane Hodder's fault. It's probably ADR from someone else, maybe even the director. And I'd be curious to know if Kane agreed with that approach, or if he was like, "Wait a second, Jason doesn't make noises." I'm with you. I'm not a fan. It adds a weird level of vulnerability to him that I don't like.
The comment that you made about Jason's movements are also worth bringing up again, because through the years, I've just heard that, one of the things that people really like about Kane Hodder's version of Jason is that he always telegraphs his moves by looking in the direction that he's going to move toward before he does it. And so, he'll turn his head to the left and look, and then he'll move his body to the left and head in that direction. And it's just little subtle things like that that are cool. But here he really seems kind of disoriented, which is fine. Maybe he wasn't expecting the girl to get away and it's dark out and he can't see where he's going, but it does kind of take away from some of the menace of Jason, because he just seemed like a confused idiot in the woods where he's just like, huh?
It doesn't feel a whole lot like Jason to me. Cosmetically, we know it is. He's got a machete, he's got a hockey mask, and it's the same guy that we've seen the last couple of movies, but it doesn't feel quite like the same character to me for some reason. But in standard horror movie fashion, Elizabeth, having run for a while, pauses in a clearing, looks around and doesn't see anything. But of course, Jason appears directly behind her, and just as she's about to meet her fate, Klieg lights flare into illumination and spotlight Jason, blinding him almost. He's frozen in his tracks. What the hell is going on now?
I don't know, but it's pretty sweet, because I think it's pretty clear that this is either some sort of trap or he's wandered into some sort of, local shooting range and, that he shouldn't be. He set off some like motion detector lights.
He's going to have to take on some rednecks.
Right. But yeah, it's certainly kind of a change of pace where all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, it doesn't appear that Elizabeth and Jason are alone.
Right. And she seems more in charge of the situation than we first thought, because she flips acrobatically over some concealed SWAT type guys who open fire. This actually kind of reminds me of that scene at the beginning of Spies Like Us, when they have parachuted into the training camp and all of a sudden the ninjas are there with the commanding officer and yeah, so it's just like, this is clearly a military operation of some kind. But
it's a dick fur.
What's a dick fur?
To pee with.
One question that came to mind, though, is how did Jason not see them setting all this shit up? It's not like it's that far away from where he's obviously trucking around this area a lot. You would think that they would have had to, chopper this equipment in or have a lot of heavy trucks to set all this stuff up. So it just seems strange that he wouldn't have known this was going on. In any case, the SWAT guys absolutely open fire on Jason. They have him completely surrounded and just riddle him with bullets. And then in what seems almost like an airstrike, we hear the sounds of some sort of propelled explosive slam into Jason and blow him to pieces.
Yeah, and this is all part of the plan, because right before this happens, one of the soldiers yells, "Incoming!" directly into the camera. And so it's a little comical, and like you said, maybe this is a scene out of Spies Like Us, but yeah, and then this mortar, this bomb or missile or something comes out of nowhere and blows him, I'm not done, into a million pieces.
Which, this is something we've not seen before. We've just watched Jason Voorhees get his ass kicked definitively. I mean, we've seen him take axes to the head. We've seen him take a machete through his head and then slide down the blade. All manner of attempts to kill Jason, but they've never resulted in his body being blown apart. So, I mean, I have to say, shit got real.
Yeah. And I absolutely remember seeing this in the theater and thinking, what the hell? This is not even 5 minutes into the movie, and Jason has just been torn to shreds in some sort of, military operation. But, the soldiers, they're all cheering and high-fiving as Jason's smoldering head lands on the ground next to his still beating heart. But off in the distance, we see a mysterious man wearing a black cowboy hat, and he's been watching all this transpire from a safe vantage point. And whoever he is doesn't seem too convinced that this plan has worked, as he says to himself, "I don't think so." And this is where we learn that Elizabeth Marcus was actually Agent Marcus. So the FBI essentially had set a honey trap to capture old Jason.
Yeah, she's given a poncho and congratulated by the commander, who again looks directly at camera when talking to Mahoney. So I'm wondering, is this a crossover with Police Academy now?
Yeah, like he graduated from the Police Academy and he's worked his way up all to the FBI.
Right, but I mean, you'd think Tackleberry would have been part of this operation. So it's just kind of we don't see her again. She survives, but we don't see her again. So we can discuss. Agent Marcus was played by Julie Michaels, who is an actress and stunt woman, and has appeared on screen a lot. She was in Point Break. She had a small role in Batman and Robin, The Scorpion King, and a bunch of TV. But most importantly, she was Denise in Roadhouse, which the bad guys, kind of main squeeze. And I mean, we're dangerously close to me turning this into a podcast solely about Roadhouse because I love that movie so much. But I'll spare you. She's still working and now does a lot of stunts and stunt coordinating. Doesn't have a trivia section on IMDb, which I found interesting, but I did learn that she has broken her neck and her back, but fully recovered. So, I mean, she's in great shape and she seems really enthusiastic about having been in this movie.
So I got to say, Greg, I'm totally on board with this movie so far, and I can't imagine anything happening in the next 10 minutes that would completely change my opinion.
No, I mean, this is kind of great. Like it's set us up with the familiar feeling situation for the most part, but then we've suddenly gotten this startling turn, and I can't imagine where they're going to take it, but I'm sure it's going to be awesome. We see Jason's heart laying on the ground, and it slowly stops beating, and then it cuts to the title card. Jason goes to hell with the Final Friday, but there's kind of a cut rate animation of a blood slash that then drips below the logo, and I thought that was a little bit cheesy. Unfortunately, the movie takes a little bit of a misstep, in my opinion, at this point, because the title sequence is interlaced with footage of the scenes from the movie as it's progressing. So you'll get, a vignette and then another credit, and then a vignette and another credit. And that's one of my least favorite things in the world. It actually began driving me nuts with Alien 3, which I saw in the theater, and let alone my other criticisms of that movie. But right away I could tell, oh, you really shouldn't be disrupting the narrative flow of a movie by reminding us we're watching a movie. I don't know why directors do that, and it drives me batshit crazy.
I agree. It's really distracting, and I know that most movies have kind of gotten away from the habit of starting a movie with credits. A lot of movies just kind of kick off now, and then the credits are saved for the end, and that's fine. But I don't even really mind credits at the beginning, as long as they're not getting into things like, Gaffer and, First Boy and things like that in the opening credits. But yeah, when you're starting to interrupt actual footage of the movie, it just becomes frustrating, because you start to get into it and you're like, oh, what's happening? And then it cuts away and it shows, who the caterer was. And you're like, oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a fan of cold opens, like with James Bond, where they'll show you a scene and then bam, you get the whole title credit sequence at once. I always kind of like that. It feels cinematic to me, but it's very interruptive. And it's a pet peeve of mine. And so that was a choice that I really disliked immediately.
So the first scene that we see as the credits are coming in and out is that we are at the federal morgue in Youngstown, Ohio. I couldn't really find anything about an actual federal morgue in Youngstown or anywhere else for that matter, but I did find something called the Disaster Mortuary Operational Response Team, or DMORT. It's a team of experts in the fields of victim identification and mortuary services, and they're activated in response to large-scale disasters in the United States to assist in the identification of deceased individuals and storage of the bodies pending the bodies being claimed.
Oh, wow.
So I'm wondering if there's some kind of bat signal that goes up and sends these guys into action.
Like a silhouette of a body bag or something, and
Right. For organizational purposes, the country is divided into 10 regions, with different DMORT teams being divided amongst those regions. Since this facility we're seeing is in Ohio, this would be considered Region 5, which also includes Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan, but not New Jersey, where we've always been told Crystal Lake is located. That would be a Region 2 team. And the only other thing I could find was the Federal Emergency Mortuary Assistance, which is ostensibly having access to additional mortuary facilities if their local resources are already overwhelmed. New York City, Hawaii, and North Carolina recently asked for this federal assistance after their morgues were near capacity during the COVID-19 pandemic.
That's pretty cool. I mean, it doesn't really answer my biggest question, which is why they would have trucked him all the way from New Jersey to Youngstown. But maybe, if unlike what you just described, in this universe, they only have this one federal mortuary facility, he had to go there regardless of where he came from. But I don't even really get a sense of how much time has gone by. Like, did they chopper him there? Was this like a convoy that took a couple of days to make the trip? So, I mean, let's say it's anywhere up to a week after the events that we just saw of him being blown apart. He's been shipped off to this federal morgue. So he's hit the big time. Like, if he's getting federal attention, the FBI has this special weapons unit attack him. And I mean, the U.S. government, the federal government is now involved in Jason Voorhees. He's the big time.
We see a gentleman wheeling a body bag on a gurney down the hall of the federal morgue. And this is Phil the coroner. I don't really get a sense that this federal morgue is all that different than a regular morgue. Not that I've spent a lot of time in morgues, but aside from a couple of security guards outside the door, it just doesn't really seem all that different.
Yeah, I mean, Phil the coroner doesn't seem, military or even really government. He seems almost like a local coroner. There's nothing particularly incompetent seeming about him, but he doesn't seem to be quite at the level of any sort of federally backed or official reporting structure or anything. And he has to be checked in by these two guards, one of whom is a mullet rocking Kane Hodder. So it's nice to see him without any hockey mask or makeup on appearing in a movie and gets a speaking part. So that's cool.
I love how seriously Kane is acting in this scene, too. He's just like, this is my moment.
Yeah.
So these two imposing security guards frisk and ID Phil the coroner and allow him to go into the room. And we get a close-up shot of the gurney where everything is covered by a body bag except for Jason's heart, which we see sitting off to the side in a nice little bowl. Next to the body, we see the front cover of a folder that says eyes only, which is just jargon used with regard to classified information, which supports Greg's theory that Jason really has hit the big time.
But why would there need to be any sort of air of secrecy around Jason's autopsy? I mean, why would the government want to keep its findings so classified? Unless they were, planning on using what they learned about his phenomenal powers to create a super soldier serum that, if they were going to weaponize Jason or something.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, we don't really know what they're trying to get out of this autopsy, but no, it's an interesting point.
So we then begin to see, the process of Jason's autopsy being conducted, although, like I've complained about, it's interrupted by more snippets of the title credits. But we learn that Jason apparently weighs between 230 and 240 pounds. So he's a big dude, which, we kind of commented on earlier. He is described as Caucasian. I find that curious because in this mutated state, who can really tell? It's virtually meaningless given how inhuman he's begun looking.
The coroner even says that there's massive tissue loss due to extreme explosive trauma, which I want that to be my autopsy report. And that there's third-degree burns over 65% of his body. So, he's in bad shape.
Yeah, and the coroner states that there are over 100 bullet wounds. I believe it based on the level of firepower we saw deployed against him. I will acknowledge that one credit that interrupted the flow of the story was confirming that Harry Manfredini is back on the music. It's always nice to have him back. This sounds a little more synthesizer-y than I'm used to from him, but it's still got a lot of his characteristic flourishes, and it's great that he's back where he should be. The coroner continues with his work, and he's paying particular attention to Jason's weird-looking heart, which he states is twice the size of a normal heart, sort of like the Grinch on Christmas morning.
He also indicates that he sees severe pulmonary edema, but he says this while looking at the heart, and pulmonary edema relates to the lungs. Pulmonary edema is often caused by congestive heart failure. When the heart is not able to pump efficiently, blood can back up into the veins that take blood through the lungs, and as the pressure in these blood vessels increases, fluid is pushed into the air spaces in the lungs. And the reason why I know this is because my wife is a molecular biologist who does lung research. So when she happened to walk in and see the guy looking at the heart and saying that there's evidence of pulmonary edema, she was like, "What?"
If only the screenwriter had her consulting when he wrote this scene.
But regardless, the coroner's final observation in this chunk is him declaring that this guy is, quote, deader than shit.
And that's where the segment ends. The coroner is probing the heart with a scalpel. We've had one death this episode, and it's Jason himself. And pretty goddamn definitively, I might add.
To find out what kind of extreme explosive trauma my lunch is going to cause to my bowels, tune in next week for another episode of You're All Doomed.
Demon?